Hey, Sean here, and in this video I'm going to go over how to choose the right hosting company in 10 easy steps. Now, with regards to equipment in your website, your hosting is the most important piece of equipment that you have to run your website. In fact, without this piece, you can't have a website at all, and if you have a bad web hosting, you can run into things like your website not loading all the time and it going down, or specific parts of your website having trouble, not loading, not working, all the way up to even having your website just totally not work at all. And then on top of that, having the wrong hosting platform can also incur you a lot of extra costs and fees. So making sure you get this right is super critical. Now, because it is a bit of a technical thing and it can be difficult to understand what to choose, I'm going to make this simple and give you these 10 easy steps that you can apply right after watching this video to choose the right hosting company for you. Alright, let's dive into those 10 easy steps to choose the right hosting company for you. Now, before I dive into that, let me explain what web hosting is in the first place, in case you're not quite sure what it is or you have a little bit of uncertainty on it. So, a web hosting company or web hosting platform is just where your files for your website are physically housed, where they're physically kept. And you are required to have this because you need some place for those files to sit and live. And a web server or web hosting server is a computer that's connected to the internet that can be accessed, that when someone visits your website, what happens is a request is sent to that web server and says, give me these files, and then the web server sends those files to that website visitor, which then goes to their computer so that they can then see your web page, your images, etc. So as you see, without this, you can't and don't have a website. So it's, again, super critical that you have this and have the right web hosting set up for you. Okay, with that sort of, basic understanding of what web hosting is, let's move on to those 10 easy steps, starting with step number 1, which is to choose whether you should be hosted on a dedicated server, shared server, or cloud server. Now, I know for some of you this may be like, what did he just even say? And don't worry, I'm going to break this down into simple, easy terms, and that way you can understand these and know exactly what those are and what you should choose. So let's go over what each of these are and then their pros and cons. So a dedicated server is basically a dedicated computer connected to the internet, and the only one on that computer, the only one's files on that are your website's files, and that's it. The upside of this is that you have total control usually of that computer. So if you want to customize it, put whatever on there, you can do it. And all of the resources, the memory of the computer, all of that is yours to do with whatever you like. You have total control over that, and you can use as many of those resources that computer has as you'd like. Now, the downside of this is that this is the most costly, or usually the most costly version of web hosting, because you're basically renting an entire computer. So that's the dedicated server. Let's talk about the shared server, which is sort of in contrast to that. The shared server, you're basically sharing space on one of those servers. So there will be multiple people with multiple websites on that same server. So you only pay for that small portion of that server that you're using. So the upside is the cost is a lot less. The downsides are that you can only use a finite amount of resources that that server or computer has in total. And if someone else on that server does something bad or wrong, it can affect your website by either slowing it down or even crashing the whole system. And that can be a problem. But again, the cost sometimes can outweigh this problem. And if you're lucky, you can find hosting providers that sort of monitor and manage this so that they don't have a lot of these issues and troubles with these other accounts or websites on that same computer. Now, those two options are good. Let's talk about this last option, which is a little bit totally different, I would say, than the dedicated and shared, and this is the cloud server hosting environment. So in this environment, basically it's a bunch of computers or servers all connected together, and they are sharing all of their resources, so all of their memory, all of the space on the computers, and it's available to you to use as much of it as you want. So typically this would allow you to have a lot more space than you typically could have on just a dedicated or shared server, because you can have multiple computers connected. And also you can scale up and down how much of that you want or don't want. And the thing that's good about price on this is you only pay for what you use. So if you use XYZ, that's all you typically pay for. And the other plus side is that typically the other people on those shared server, on that cloud system, because there will be multiple people on that system with you, what they do typically will not affect your site, because there are so many resources to share that it usually doesn't affect you. Now, as far as price, it's sort of a plus or minus depending on your situation. In some cases, the amount of resources that you use can make it pretty inexpensive, comparable to the shared server. On other ends, depending on how big your website is and what it needs to use, it can make the cost as much as the dedicated server, and other times even more expensive than the dedicated server. But the thing is with this, if you have a really big website or you have a site that sees a lot of traffic, this is a good option because you can scale the site up and down depending on how much traffic you're getting, therefore actually reduce your cost, where maybe some moments your cost might be a little bit higher for maybe an hour or two or a day or a couple days than a dedicated server, but then they may go back down to the typical cost of a shared server because you don't have as many people on your website. So this can be a good way or strategy to sort of reduce your costs but still keep you able to have a good working functioning website. All right, with those three options, there you have it. There is one extra option though, a very special option that I did want to talk about, and that's called specialty hosting, we could call it. And it's basically hosting environments or servers set up for specific website framework types. Now, website frameworks is basically just the structure of the website or a specific software that people use to run the website. An example of that would be WordPress, which is a very popular framework for both blogging and setting up a website. Now, there are specialty servers out there that are built just to run WordPress websites. The positive of that is that that server is set up for speed to make it very fast for those kind of sites and also very secure for those kind of sites. And as a result too, it typically is a lower cost than you could on your own, basically emulate the same kind of system. So that's a great option if you have something like that. If you have WordPress or you're using some other type of platform, I would sort of lean you towards using that type of system. Now, with that in mind, our company does offer something like that too. We have our own WordPress hosted system, and if you're interested in that or you still have some questions on what are the best type of server to get, a dedicated, shared, or cloud, or this specialty, make sure you click the free evaluation link that I put in the description of this video, and we will go over that with you and answer your questions. Or if you're ready to use our WordPress system, we'll go through your site and just make sure that it is able to be compatible with what we have. All right, so there you have it. Those are your options there. Hopefully that gives you something to sort of narrow down or at least pick what you're going to use for your server. Next, let's move on to step number 2, which is the speed of the servers or the hosting company in general. Now, this is important because a lot of people don't realize web hosting companies and servers are not all the same. Some are fast, some are slow, and you want to basically look if they have a comparison chart or a benchmark of their company versus other companies, and just look at that and see how well or how bad this company does in comparison. All right, once you've done that and you can kind of gauge whether this company's good or bad, it's time to move on to step number 3, which is to assess whether they can host multiple websites or not. Now, this actually only applies if you're wanting to host more than one website. If you only have one website, you can kind of just skip this step. But if you don't, basically, if you have multiple websites, you want to check with that hosting company and make sure that you can host multiple websites on your account with them and what the cost is for that. Sometimes there's an extra fee for that. And also beware, there is a gotcha with this where sometimes they will say you can add on a bunch of sites, meaning you can add on a bunch of www.whatever.com and they all point to the same website. Now, if that's what you want, that's great, but if you're wanting actual separate websites, make sure you clarify that with them to see what the options you have for that are. Okay, with that in mind, it's time to move on to step number 4, which is checking out the uptime of the web hosting company. Now, what is uptime? Uptime is that hosting company's guarantee for how much or how often your website will remain online, meaning how often they guarantee it'll stay up. It won't crash because of their hosting problem or whatever on their end. So you want to look for at least 99% uptime. Now, there are some companies that claim 100%. It's a bit debatable whether that's even possible, but you want to look for companies that say at least 99%. And that means if your site goes down because of a hosting issue, they will credit your account for whatever time that is for your next month's billing. So you're not paying for something you actually didn't receive. So that's sort of how that works. And it's good, again, to check that, make sure it's 99%. And, most companies do offer 99%, but check that. So there, with that, it's time to move on to step number 5, which is to check the languages that the website hosting supports. Now, if you're on a dedicated server, a lot of times you have to set all of that up, so this question doesn't matter. But all the other platforms you do or probably do need to check this. So you'll probably have to ask your website developer what languages, programming languages was my website written in, and then go to your potential hosting company and say, does this system I'm looking at purchasing, is it compatible with these languages? Does it work with these computer programming languages for my website? And they'll answer you yes, no, and then you can go from there. But it's critical that it does support that, because if it doesn't, your website's not going to work. And obviously you don't want that. So with that in mind and answered, you want to move on to step number 6, which is making sure the hosting has enough memory. Now, typically what I would suggest for an average website, you're going to need 1 to 2 gigabytes of memory. Now, you want to ask your web developer how much memory they think your website needs, and then you can sort of gauge this. If you're just not sure or unable to get that information from them, I would go with 1 to 2 gigabytes and then go from there. All right, with that question answered, you're ready to move on to step number 7, which is how much bandwidth the hosting platform that you're going to be on will support. And if you're not sure what bandwidth is, let's talk about that and I'll explain. Bandwidth basically relates to how much traffic your website can handle. And bandwidth is how much how much of those files going to the website visitors that you're allotted. So usually that's so much memory that they'll allow you to allot of those files going off to that person, which it means basically how much traffic your website can support. So you want to find that out so that you can understand just if your website is a very high traffic website, you want to make sure that there's enough bandwidth that you can, actually support all the people that come to your website, or else they won't be able to see your site. So you may just ask the web hosting company, kind of explain what your website is, and they could probably give you a ballpark idea of whether their system will support you or not. All right, so with that answered, you want to move on to step number 8, which is security. Now you want to make sure that they have some kind of security on their system and ask what that is. This is super critical because I would say probably every website, and I might be exaggerating on this a little bit, but I don't think I am. Probably every website, I would say just about every day, sees at least 1 or 2 people trying to hack it. If your site's online, somebody is going to try to hack it at some point or another, probably multiple times. And many times they don't succeed. Probably 99% of the time they don't succeed at that. But that's because of your security system. And you want to find out and make sure that the company you're with has a good system in place for that. So ask them what that is and how it works with them. All right, with that answered, you're ready to move on to step number 9, which is the backups for your website. Now, you should always have a system in place for backups of your website. And I would say you should ask these 3 questions, which are 1, when it backups, like when the backups happen, is it daily? And because I would suggest you would do daily. Then, well, first off, obviously you ask, do you do backups? Then is it how often, daily or not? And then the third thing is how you're able to apply those backups in case you need to use one of them. And you want to get those questions answered because it may seem like obvious that you're going to be able to do all of that, but some companies don't have the ability to do that, and they charge you to do each one of those steps. So make sure you find out those information before you choose that web hosting company. All right, with that in mind, we are finally ready to look at step number 10, which is to actually look at the price and compare that to other companies. Now, you want to make sure you're looking at apples to apples. All of those points we just talked about, you want to make sure that you're looking at the same thing for each one of these companies and price that you're comparing. And then you can finally choose your hosting company and be satisfied and also feel confident in that you chose the right company for what your system needs. All right, with that, if you're still confused, you have questions, or you just need a little help on this, feel free to use the link we put in our description. There's a free evaluation, and we can go through your website with you and help you out with this whole process and go over these steps with you, or just do the whole thing for you. Just get with us and we'll figure that out, if there's any cost on our end for you to do that. But at least we can give you a free evaluation of what you would need to do. So there you have it. Take advantage of that. And if you're on YouTube watching this video, make sure that you click the thumbs up that you like this. Make sure that you're subscribed to our video channel, and you click the bell icon, which that allows YouTube to notify you every time we create these awesome videos. And until our next one, I wish you the best.